evening, everybody. How are you all tonight on our last session together? You're all looking fine. All right. Well, tonight we want to just bring together the 5 weeks that we have been sharing together on the theme, disciple making and mentoring. What I want to do is just quickly run through the 5 sessions and just highlight the key things that we've been looking at over those weeks together. And then we're going to open it up for a time of questions where you might have a question that you want to ask in relation to disciple making or mentoring. And we'll run the mic to you. We'll get you just to put your hand up. We'll run the mic to you, let you speak into the mic. Don't be afraid. And just ask the question, and between Diane and myself, we'll do our best. And if we don't know the answers, well, I don't know what we'll do, but we'll work it out one way. Like the chauffeur back in that first illustration that I used right at the beginning. I'll ask my chauffeur if I don't know the answer, and I'm sure she'll have something wise to say. So that's the plan, and then the last little section tonight, after the question time, is just bringing it all together and saying, okay, what does this mean now for each one of us? Where do we go from here? And I've got a little response form that I'll hand out, and you can respond accordingly. All right, so what we're going to do now is just fly through the 5 sessions and just quickly pick out the key things that we've covered, because we've stretched out over all this time. I can hardly remember the first session, it seems so long ago, and probably you are the same. So I just want to bring it all together tonight in a concentrated way to stimulate questions you might have for that question time. We started with the call to discipleship in our first session, and we saw that this is the urgent need of our churches. Our churches might be involved in many good things, but at the centre of everything that we should be doing as God's people in the life of our church, we should be making disciples. We saw the crisis of today's church was threefold, and you have this in your notes, and we went through that together. The crisis of today's church, a wrong measure of success, counting how many come rather than what's happening there. Superficial Christianity as a result, and ongoing spiritual infancy, which was a problem right back there even in the time the writer to the Hebrews wrote that passage in Hebrews 5. Believers who had grown so far but had plateaued out and were still being bottle-fed spiritual milk, but were not learning how to be self-feeders, and were not going on to maturity so that they in turn could teach others. And our churches, I believe, are facing that same problem today. And I shared some survey statistics that said in any congregation, 10% of the congregation will grow on the sermons they receive on Sunday because they are self-feeding Christians during the week. The other 90% are just maintaining from what they get on Sunday. They're not following it through with anything very much during the week, and therefore they've grown so far and they're just plateauing. The crisis of today's church is still that very concern, ongoing spiritual infancy. We went on and thought about some of the signs of spiritual infancy and saw that the goal is spiritual maturity, and that spiritual maturity is not related just to how long you've been a Christian. It's not automatically you grow to maturity, but there are factors that principles need to be working in your life if you are to go on and grow toward maturity. Then we went on to think about the Great Commission, and just to look again at that final mandate, command, or whatever you like to call it, that Jesus gave to his disciples before he went back to heaven, which was bringing together the fulfillment of all that he had sought to do on his earthly ministry. He gave them this Great Commission, which in my particular case, for many, many years, I thought was a call to become a missionary and go overseas to some faraway place in cross-cultural ministry. The call to go and make disciples to me was go over there to Tanzania or go to Europe or to Asia and make disciples there. But I didn't realize what the Great Commission was really saying. And so we tried to look at that. And we saw that to understand the Great Commission, the primary call of the Great Commission is to make disciples. All the other words, action words in the Great Commission are supporting that central thrust. Perhaps I should do it this way because that's the way the arrow looks there. I'll confuse you if I go backwards. The going, the preaching, the teaching, the baptizing are all supporting that central thrust to make disciples. But if we're going to make disciples, you've got to bring in converts. And so evangelism is obviously a very important part. Christians have to be on the cutting edge of sharing their faith with others. We don't wait for the church to do it for us. We're all meant to be a part of it. And so we see in that diagram before you the evangelism aspect of the Great Commission, bringing them to the point where they are baptized, and baptism in the New Testament is a sign of conversion. We notice the Great Commission doesn't say go and make converts or go and get decisions or go and win new Christians. It doesn't stop there. It says go and make disciples. So the second phase of the Great Commission tells us how to do it. Baptizing them and teaching them to obey, not just to know with their heads, but to put it into their life. Obey all that I have commanded you. And so that second part is showing the flow on, the process of disciple making is an integral part of the process of making disciples, obviously. And that involves both formal instruction, taking them through all the essential areas to develop their relationship with Jesus, and also modeling it for them, saying, as I follow Christ, so you follow me. What you see of the Christ-like in me, you copy that. So it's someone coming alongside these new believers, teaching them the essential areas and modeling it for them. Being like a spiritual parent, being like a mentor there, to walk the journey with them long enough for them to be doing it. Teaching them to obey. You can't do that in a weekend, pressure cooker kind of training program. You can't do it in 2-week program course. You can't even do it in 6 weeks or 6 months. It needs a substantial amount of time for that growing process to take place. And the end result is disciples are being produced, growing to maturity, impacting others, knowing how to go through the same process themselves. Then we went on in our second session and looked at turning believers into disciples and disciples into disciple makers. And I shared with you the 3 C's that if a church or if a community of believers are intentionally discipling believers like Jesus has told us to do in the Great Commission, there are 3 key parts of that process that I've summarized with these 3 words starting with C. Can you remember what they were? The first is intentional discipleship training should be cyclical. All right, the Great Commission I've done as a straight arrow just for simplicity, but in reality, it is the cycle now that is the way it takes place. Let's just finish the other C's and then we'll look at that cycle again. The second C is it should be comprehensive. In other words, if we are going to make disciples, as I've already said, it needs to be full enough, complete enough, long enough, not for them just to know the truth, but to live the truth. For it to be transforming of their lives so that they are living now. They're developing convictions. They're developing a Christian lifestyle with Christ at the center. It needs to be comprehensive. a 6-week little kickstart for new Christians and then let them loose and hope they grow from then on will not do. And that's the crisis of the church today. We've gone on that model far too long. We've got to change it. The third thing about intentional discipleship training, cyclical, comprehensive, and continuous. It needs to be like the hub at the center of every church, bringing in new believers and even older believers who haven't been discipled, moving them round until they start to grow and go on to maturity, and then releasing them into a new level of ministry and effectiveness themselves. And so we have this picture now, the 4 calls of Jesus, which we showed you is what I believe the New Testament picture of what it's all about, the 4 calls of Jesus. The first call, come to me, from an unbeliever to the point I come to the cross and become a believer, from lost to being found. And then the second call, come follow me, the call to discipleship, from being found to becoming a follower of Jesus and walking with him. And then a continuation of that, the third call is becoming fishers of men, because that's what Jesus calls us to become, to not only follow but to find others. And then the final part of the cycle is, as I become a follower, a true disciple myself, then Jesus' call on me is to pass on what I've learned to others, to impact others through my life, through my experience of God in my life, teach them the Word of God as I have understood it, and now go and make disciples. And the arrowhead is that 2 Timothy 2:2 principle. The things you have learned of me, Paul said, now find other faithful men that you can train and teach and impart it into them, so that they in turn will do the same with others. The cycle has to happen, and Jesus is at the center. It's all to do with relationship with him. And I believe if churches really flowed round this cycle, we would see incredible church growth. We would see an amazing transformation in the impact of Christians upon younger Christians and upon the wider community as we do what Jesus has called us to do. We then translated that picture in terms of the discipleship manuals that we have produced to try and provide tools to help people do it. Because it's no good just telling Christians you're meant to be involved in a cycle of growth, but how do they know what are the key areas they need to be growing in? And so over many years, I have developed this cyclical series of books which is addressing each of the areas so that yourself as one who is growing, or yourself as a discipler of others, have a tool to use to help you take a person through those areas. And you will grow yourself as you take someone else through them. And as you move around the cycle, you will be amazed at what God will do in your life and through your life, through impacting the Word of God and the Spirit of God, making that alive and real in your life. So this cycle of manuals are not just for information, they are for spiritual formation. That's their intention, and that's what they're designed to do. And then we translated that 4 calls into the mission of the church in that other cycle, which is now just transposing those same principles across. What should we as believers be doing? Well, we should be seeking the lost through all those different means, bringing them to Christ. Then we should be nurturing believers through follow-up and through those other categories of discipling there. And then we should be growing disciples and then training disciple makers, making fishers of men and training disciple makers. That's the mission of the church. That's what we're meant to be doing. That's the heart of what it's all about. All the other things that are happening in the life of the church can be good and valuable, but they must build around that center core. Making disciples is what Jesus has called us to do. All right? So we've gone through all that, but let's just quickly move on now. We then, in session 3, asked the question, well, what is a disciple? Because we've been talking about making disciples and we have not really defined what a disciple is. I used the illustration of a shoe factory with money and manpower being poured into this factory, and the manager, the owner of the business, expecting that out of that was going to come the product, shoes. And we imagine what would happen if all the workers and all the money that had been put into that factory, they were having a great time, having seminars and having a happy little time in there doing all sorts of things and keeping the building lovely and clean and well painted, but no shoes are being produced. I think the owner would be very concerned. And so we translated that simple illustration into what the church is meant to be doing. The money and the manpower, the people involved, the resources, the gifting that God has equipped each one of us with in the life of the church should all be combining for the one express purpose that out of the life of the community of believers we are seeing and we ourselves are growing to maturity, becoming better, stronger, more effective disciples, and disciples are being produced and going out into their business world, going out into their family life, going out into their colleges and schools and community and making a difference. Only disciples are going to impact the world. Disciples in the sense of a growing, going on to maturity believer, Christian. Then we went on and looked at about 6 marks of a disciple, which I'm not going to go through now, but you have them listed in your study notes, and we went through them all to see what we mean by a disciple. Disciple simply is a disciplined one who has not only accepted the call to come to Jesus, but has taken Jesus' yoke upon himself or herself and is yoked together with Christ and is on the journey together, learning of Christ to come into obedience and submission to his lordship in every area of life. And out of that partnership, something is happening. God is ploughing through your life, the field of the kingdom. Seeds are being sown and a harvest will result. And you will never know how you will impact other people apart from being a disciple of Jesus. As you focus on your relationship with him and walking in the yoke with Jesus, concentrate on keeping in step with him, he will bring an incredible fruitfulness out of your life. You don't have to be concerned about the fruitfulness. You be concerned about walking in the yoke, surrendering to his lordship, living each day as he wants you to live, and you'll be amazed at what happens. Where he takes you, what he does through you, the unexpected surprises along the way. And our lives have been filled with the surprises that God has had for us. Trained in agriculture, God led me through a point of surrender to a totally different track into Bible teaching that I wasn't trained for or felt equipped for, and into a whole new area of ministry that if I chose myself, I would not be doing today. But as I look back, I say, God just called me to surrender to him at every critical point along the way, and through the struggles and even the reluctance at times to do that. When I said yes, it opened up a whole new dimension now of possibilities and new discoveries of his gifting on my life and opportunities for ministry that I never would have dreamed of. That's the deal in discipleship, going with him and being willing to count the cost, because there is a cost involved, but it's worth it all. And then we just quickly looked at what a new believer needs, because to begin making disciples, you have to start from the beginning with a new believer. A new believer needs spiritual milk. It's no good dropping them into home groups where there are older believers talking about the deep theology of the book of Ephesians, or going into the book of Revelation and older believers having a wonderful time speculating about what that's going to happen at the end times. Young Christians don't need that at that point. They need spiritual milk. You must take them into a level where they can receive it in a form that is suitable for them at their stage of growth. They need not only spiritual milk, but they need spiritual parents. They need someone to walk the journey with them, someone they can confide in, someone they can ask the questions, someone who's going to take them through all the key areas. And we looked at scriptures that gave us the foundation for that. 1 Peter 2:2 and 1 Thessalonians 2:8-12. And what a new believer needs to know, we looked at all those points. And then we looked at what a new believer needs to be able to do in order to start to grow, to start to go on with Christ, to start to develop their relationship with Jesus. Now, they might get this bit in bits and pieces through the ministries of the church, through sermons, through books, through Bible readings of their own, but it can sometimes take years and years, and many of them never really put all the pieces together. If you could only have someone take them through all those areas, it could save months and even years of wandering around in a spiritual infancy stage when they could be powering on and growing toward maturity because someone has taken the time to take them through all the key areas. It reminds me of some airports I have been at when I'm struggling along with my cases and bags and pulling a trolley, trying to catch this plane. You come along these big corridors, and sometimes you notice there's a parallel escalator, a flat escalator that you can get on, and it runs you along at about 3 times the speed as if you were walking yourself. You know what I'm talking about? I believe that's often what happens with new believers. We leave them with the luggage, struggling along there, trying to get to their destination. And sometimes they get so tired they just drop their bags and sit down there. When if only someone could come alongside them and take them through the key areas, it would be like moving them onto the escalator that in 3 times as fast they could get to their destination if only someone had helped them along the journey at that point in time. And I believe discipling does that. It really moves them on at the pace that they should be going to grow to the maximum potential instead of leaving them to struggle on their own. And then we looked at growing a believer into a disciple, and we saw that My First Steps has been designed to provide a new believer with what I believe they need in order to get started. It's like a bottle of milk to get them started. And then Come Follow Me is designed now to grow a believer into a disciple, because there is a difference between being a believer and being a disciple. A disciple is now a disciplined one. A disciple is coming under the lordship of Christ. And so Come Follow Me is designed to facilitate that process and make sure the person is encountering the truths of Scripture, the Word of God, in those key areas of growing into a disciple, a mature disciple of Jesus. And then we moved on to our 4th session, discipling and mentoring, letting your life impact others. And we looked at some biblical examples, how the early church in Acts 2, all those converts that came in, 3,000 of them, they didn't just tell them to attend services, but they discipled them. These new believers devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer, and they were daily meeting together in the temple and in each other's homes. There was a real close interacting going on there, that these new believers were brought into the dynamic life of the New Testament church and not left to find their own way. They committed themselves, devoted themselves to these essential foundation things. No wonder the early church just grew so phenomenally in a hostile environment. And the Christians within 3 centuries had won the Roman Empire. There was discipling happening. We saw Barnabas more in a mentoring capacity, taking this unknown Saul of Tarsus, believing in him, seeing potential in him, coming alongside him and introducing him into the life of the fellowship in Jerusalem, and then down the track, taking him on as an understudy for 12 months in a church planning ministry, until that young Paul became the great apostle, the missionary apostle who went out, firstly with Barnabas leading the way, Barnabas and Paul, but gradually now it became Paul and Barnabas. Barnabas stepping back and letting his mentoree now step out into his ministry under God. And so that's a wonderful example. How many Pauls, young Pauls or Sauls are there in our churches needing and longing for a mature Barnabas to come alongside them, to encourage them, to mentor them, to develop them and see potential in them and push them forward into ministry? How many are there? We can thank God for Barnabas, because out of Barnabas, God used his mentoring and his discipling to bring to the church the great gift of the Apostle Paul. How many of the great preachers, teachers, Christians today have their story of the Barnabases in their life and the people who have taken time to walk the journey with them? We don't hear about those mentors and those disciples, but we hear about these people now who are having a great impact in their churches and in their communities. But there's a story behind all of them, I'm sure you'll find. We went and looked at some of the different kinds of mentoring, and we had this scale showing the intensive end of the scale, which is the discipling. And discipling is primarily focusing on taking them through all the key areas of instruction and teaching in the Word of God that are going to give them that solid foundation. It is relational too, but perhaps not as strongly as mentoring, which is, or the spiritual guide, the coach, and some of those areas are much more relational. And so we talked about that in our previous session. We looked at principles of discipling, and then we looked at where discipling begins. Last week, for those of you who have young children still in your care, we said discipling begins at home. Start with your children. Through love and discipline, through spending time with your kids, through your own godly example, living the life before them, model for them the Christ-like. Let them see that God is important to you. Let them see it in the way you speak and in the way you behave at home. We can't escape that primary responsibility of starting at home base. But it doesn't mean we have to stay there and never do anything outside until our kids have grown up. You keep that as your focus, but you can extend out as God gives you opportunity to people beyond your immediate family. And so we looked at how to go about mentoring, and Diane especially shared some of the principles by which she has been involved in mentoring many people. And myself, mentoring to a lesser degree. I'm more in the discipling, training area, and I do mentor 2 or 3 people, occasional mentoring every 2 or 3 weeks or a month apart. Diane, she does that much more regularly with more ladies, and so she shared some valuable things last week in that area. So that's bringing us up to the present now, and that's just to bring it all back to your remembrance. And now what we want to do is just give you opportunity to ask some questions. And if you just pop your hand up if you've got a question, and Evelyn's going to come with the mic to you and just speak into the mic, and we'll do our best to help you with that. All right, has anybody got anything out of all that we've been looking at over these past weeks that you would like to ask a question about? Your turn now. I've done all the talking so far. Just to get the ball rolling, let me throw in a question that has been asked us in previous seminars that we've taken overseas in other countries and roundabout even within Australia. This is a typical question that has been asked. So I'll ask myself this question, and if I can't answer it, I'll ask Diane to answer it. That'll give you just a little bit of time to think of anything that you would like to ask yourself. The question often asked, because we often have pastors, small group leaders, church leaders in our seminars, this question is often asked. Our church has no intentional discipleship training, just small groups with a fellowship focus. How can we get a disciple-making focus into our church, like you've been talking about? So that's a question often asked. Well, let me just address that. This is talking more about a whole church. If I was addressing pastors in the seminar, I would answer like this. To make your church into a disciple-making church is going to have to start right at the top leadership level. You have to build it into your vision statement as your primary purpose. It's got to begin there with the vision of the church, and then it has to come through the leadership. The leadership have to believe in it, and they have to model it. That means the leadership of the church must actually get involved in discipling to be authentic leaders of a disciple-making church. They want to see that the leaders are committed to this model. And then it has to come through the preaching and the teaching, the call to discipleship. We're called not just to be believers, we're called to go on to discipleship. So there have to be discipleship themes coming through regularly in the preaching and the teaching ministry of the church. But it doesn't stop at the pulpit level. Then you have to start discipleship training groups. It doesn't mean they take over all the fellowship groups, the home groups, but it means among the fellowship groups, which might have different kind of emphases, you need to have some groups that have a disciple-making focus. And in some of our seminars, we challenge the pastor and say, look, turn your fellowship groups, which are often just a happy, supportive kind of good night together, where you enjoy each other's company, you might pray for one another, you might do a little Bible study and have a good supper together, especially the supper. They're valuable, but they're maintenance, largely maintaining Christians. Turn your fellowship groups into disciple training centres. Get those little cell groups back on the cutting edge. Get those people to start to really grow and go through what discipling and discipleship is all about. Teach them the key areas. Put it so that they can put it into their lives. Come back next week. Discuss how they have been applying that into their lives. Memorize key verses. All the principles of discipling, build them into at least some of your home groups. And as those groups really start to see those Christians coming alive, they will begin to multiply. One pastor asked, look, am I meant to go back to my church and just disband all groups and just sort of start a whole new thing? I said, no, don't do it like that. You just start one discipleship cell with a leader committed to discipleship, and the impact on those people, other people will be saying, hey, I want to do that too. What's going on in that group? And then you'll multiply 2 groups. And then those 2 will become 4 groups. Gradually you'll build disciple-making cells into the life of your church. And then from that, you're going to see things start to change in the life of the church. So it begins at the top, works down through the system. Now, for those who are not in a church that have a disciple-making philosophy, you can still, as a layperson, if I was answering now a layperson, I would say simply this. You get permission from your pastor to start a discipleship group. And you get a little group of people and you just take them through and start that way. And see how that can multiply in the life of the church. You come under the authority of your leadership, of course, with their permission, but let it become a part, and God can start from small beginnings to bring great results. All right? So that's one question. What about some questions from you? Anybody got any questions? Over here, Chris.
Yes, just a question on the mentoring, probably more for Diane. I know she has said to me that it's not actually counselling, but what does she actually do in the mentoring session? Is it actually using a book or just generally sort of talking?
All right, thank you, Chris. Evelyn, I'll just bring that mic up here and
Okay.
Diane can answer that one. She can talk about the question you all heard. what do you do in a mentoring? Now we're talking mentoring is a little bit different from discipling. Diane can explain how she understands that and what that is.
That's a big question, Chris, but I'll attempt to answer it. No, I don't follow any particular pattern, not in mentoring one-on-one. And as I said, I mentor quite a few young women at this particular point. And I always pray every time I meet with them, Lord, just will you guide as I meet with them? Because, you know, anything can come up. But like, for instance, I'll just say, how's your week been and that. And next minute, look, it takes very little time really. They'll just start, like someone said, you know, the guy I was going with, it's just all fallen through and I really don't know what to do. No, you know, these are real, you know, these are the things that young people sometimes they're just not sure what way to go. I've had others like, we'll only be talking about 10 minutes and then they'll say, I've just got this, I don't know what to do. Someone has really come against me and I don't know what to do. I'm grappling with the whole forgiveness issue. And I'll say, well, okay, let's start to talk about this. And it just goes from there, you know, just everyday life things. But no, I don't follow a particular a book or that. Occasionally I have said, like when I was into the Rick Warren book, you know, the 40 Days of Purpose, I was so just wrapped with that I said to one of my mentorees, I asked her to actually buy it, and she did because she wanted to. And so I said, you know, just look through it and just see there might be something you want to talk about. So the next time I met her, she actually said, oh, I couldn't believe what he said about this. And we just briefly talked about it, but not normally. So is that sort of fair enough? It really is the old saying, playing it by ear, but really it's totally depending on the Holy Spirit. And I really have to do that all the time. And I have never found God to fail me yet. Things just flow. And first, if you've never done it before, don't expect the first time to just be absolutely wonderful. But the more, like with anything, the more you do it, and if that's something that God's really, you know, just led you to another person to mentor, it'll come together.
If I can just make a comment about the relationship between discipling and mentoring. Mentoring requires a lot more spiritual maturity than discipling. Now, the more mature you are as a discipler, the more effective you're going to be in that. But with discipling, you have a track to run along. You've got a little plan of areas you're taking them through, so the tracks are laid out for you. And that's why I always encourage people who are interested in this area to begin in the discipling area, because there's a lot more support, more guidance, more direction for you. To move into mentoring now has to come out of much richer spiritual journey and appreciation of the Word of God, your own growth in the Word of God, your own experience in following Christ, and your own experience in the kind of areas that you're trying to take your mentoree through. So you really need much more maturity in that area, I believe, to be effective. All right? And Diane has mentioned, you don't have a curriculum when you're mentoring, but it's basically a relational time together where you are trying to help that person reach their potential. And so things coming up in their lives that they want to address, they basically set the agenda. But as a mentor, you also are keeping an eye on other things they may not raise that are important. So you will, at different times, talk about their own personal walk with God, their own spiritual development. You will talk about their relationships that they're struggling with, or whatever needs are coming up there. You will address their work in the world and how they're getting on in those situations. You will talk about their family life, if they've got children or their family relationships. You cover all the bases, essentially, of what is important in their life in an informal kind of way. Now, you have to have a good deal of kind of spiritual depth yourself to be able to give them good counsel in those areas. And so my advice to any of you here is make sure, well, I would suggest if this whole area is new to you, go through a discipling process with some people first. Develop your own base and the base of those that are working with you. And then as you get experienced in that area, then gradually I believe you can move into more a mentoring, sometimes taking the people you've discipled now into a mentoring relationship, which is less frequent, maybe once a month instead of once a week, less structured, and now as a spiritual guide. You've discipled them, and now you're stepping back and you're just releasing them, giving them guidance, extra help in other areas that they're contending with, and pushing them on now to grow toward maturity, you see? So that's the relationship that I sort of see it working as. All right, any other questions? One down here? Oh, sorry, one up the back first.
Sorry. Obviously, love for the Lord and love for your neighbour is critical to taking on an attitude of wanting to become a disciple and then to disciple others. And from my experience, coming from a small country town into a metropolitan church, that there is sort of a lack of cohesion or a lack of direction for believers in a metropolitan church to focus on small groups and being accountable to a smaller fellowship body. There can be some resistance there, and that obviously would flow through into not wanting to come into a discipleship arena. I just wondered how you might sort of counter that attitude if you came across it. And another question for Diane would be, where would you make the call between mentoring or your role as a mentor and then perhaps seeking more professional counselling services for a particular problem, whether you've made that call before yourself? All
right. Well, let me just take the first part of that one and then we'll look at the second part. You can't effectively disciple, I think I might have mentioned this, you can't effectively disciple people in large groups. A pastor can't disciple his congregation from the pulpit. How do I know that? Well, I tried when I was pastoring through teaching from the pulpit, hoping that would draw everybody along the journey with me that I was encouraging them to go on. But I found just what I said before, about 10% or a bit more went with me, and the others just enjoyed but coasted, plateaued. You have to come down to small group discipleship. That was Jesus' model. Jesus did not pour his time and effort and life into the large crowds. He was not flattered by the thousands that came. It was not the preaching, the Sermon on the Mount to the masses that was the pivotal, transforming influence of Jesus. What was the transforming influence of Jesus? It was with that little group of 12 that he drew out from the crowds and that came close to him. He drew them with him, poured his life into them, and then he released them into ministry, and gradually they started now to do what Jesus did. It was those 12, that little group, became the world changers. Like the stone dropped in the pond, the ripple at first is small, but gradually it went out until it reached right through the whole Roman Empire. So it basically comes down to this. If people want to keep impersonal space and distance, but don't want to come into the closeness and the accountability of small groups, you can't force them. You can only encourage them and say, look, it's in relationship, it's in this closeness together with a degree of accountability that you're going to grow. We all need that. We all need to be accountable to somebody. But in our individual society, and especially in urban centres, we just like to live our solitary life and keep our Christianity to ourselves and kind of zap into church and zap out again and don't make deep connections, or very superficial. So it's part of the deal. The churches that really can develop the small group base are the churches that thrive and really grow. grow in depth, grow in quality, not just quantity. And you look at some of the churches growing phenomenally overseas, you'll nearly always find that it's the small group is the hub and life of the church. Let me just finish that model of Jesus, because Jesus has given us the model. He didn't pour his life into the large crowds, but he discipled. The crowds were to attract. The small group of 12 was to train and disciple. But even within the 12, Jesus also mentored. He took 3 of those 12 into situations the others never went into, closer to him. And he even got alongside them one-on-one. After the resurrection, Peter, who had failed so badly, Jesus met him on the beach with some other disciples after fishing there in John 21, and he singled Peter out and said, "Come, Peter, let's have a talk." And he asked him the question, "Do you love me?" 3 times. And there was an encounter going on there, dealing with Peter's failure, reinstating him, calling him back, and giving him another chance. Jesus was mentoring one-on-one. He met James. He met other disciples after the resurrection, and even during his life there were times when he would have been alone one-on-one, or one with 3, as well as with the 12. And so we see the model of Jesus. The crowds, to attract the crowds, then to select out of them those that you can train, and then through mentoring to empower and release. And that's what mentoring does. It is like the topping up process. It is like the fine-tuning. Someone has used, for those who are familiar with golf, the 3 clubs used in golf as a picture of this whole process. The 3 clubs, and I'm not a golfer, so I'm not an expert in this field, but let me just share what others have told me. The driver is the big hitting club that sends it, hundreds of meters into the air towards the next green. That is like the big event in the church, the attractive kind of gathering together of the believers where you are basically going for the big hit with a lot of people all at once. The second club is the irons. Now there's different irons with different angles which kind of chip the ball a much shorter distance to get it closer to the hole onto the green. Now you've got to need a bit more skill here. That is like the small groups. The small groups in the church now are where you can chip them or move believers much more specifically towards God's goal for their life through the discipling process that you are intentionally taking them through, moving them towards the goal. And then the final rod that golfers use is the putter. It's that flat iron which, when you're just a couple of meters away from the hole, you just do this little putt. It has to be very accurate, very careful, very precise, and it's the putters that win the tournaments. You don't win tournaments by the big drivers, you win them by the putters. They tell me you drive for show, but you putt for dough, okay? So the putter wins the tournaments, and the putters are used twice as much as the other clubs. All right, what is that putter like? That is like the mentoring, one-on-one. You've now got them within the green area. You've brought them toward the goal, but now they just need that fine nurturing, nudging, pushing toward God's purpose for their life so that they reach what God has for them. And that's the one-on-one mentoring coming into play. Jesus has modeled it, and that's another example of what it's about. Now the second part of the question was, what was it? Do you remember it? Diane remembers it? Okay, Evelyn, you give the mic to Diane and she can just answer that one.
Thank you. That's a really good question, Lachlan. Very, very good. I didn't even think about it, so thanks for asking it. It's to do with the fine line between just sheer mentoring and that of counselling. Of course, they are different. But of course, in mentoring, there is a lot of advice given, suggestions, counsel, name it what you like. But all I can say to that one, Lachlan, is, for instance, if it's something to do with relationship the opposite sex. Well, look, I've been there, done all that. If I can't help a young person in that area, well, there's something wrong. I don't think I would send them to a counsellor when they're just asking me, how should they think about it? He said this and he hasn't done that, and we talk about it. No, I don't send them to a counsellor. Another example, a young woman asked me, my young children, they're now at primary school, I haven't been out in the workforce for years and years and years. Now I've got an opportunity, I'm not sure what to do. What do you think, Diane? Well, let's talk about it. You don't send a person to a counsellor for that. Understand? You just talk about it. She really wants to know, She hasn't been in the workforce for about 15 years, and now what? Does she take the full-time job? It will mean this and that. So we just talked about it. We talked about it. What else? Yeah, what I said before. People get hurt. I get hurt. What do you do with it? What do you do with the forgiveness issue? And I talk to them about the whole process of forgiveness and the whole thing, and not harbouring bitterness and that. They don't need a counsellor for that. We should be able to, if we're mature enough, be able to direct a young person when they're really been hurt and need counsel in that area. They don't need a counsellor. They just need someone who's a little bit more mature along the way. And they need someone who knows the Word of God and can give them all manner of scriptures to help them. But I'll give you one example. It was the end of last year. Another woman I was mentoring for a very short time, all of a sudden she said, Diane, there's something really, really worrying me, and I need to know, it's imperative that I know what to do. I said, okay, I'm just thinking like anything else that I've ever had asked. It'll be all right. Well, it wasn't. I couldn't believe what she asked me. I had never come across this thing ever. So when she finished, I just said to her, I cannot help you. I really have no idea, but I will give you the name of a counsellor, a good Christian counsellor, and I think you need to go to her. So never be afraid to just say to someone, no, I can't help you. I think you do more harm than good if you try counselling someone when they've really got big problems. But you know what I mean. But the other sorts of things that as a more mature person, we ought to have some answers, huh? What do you reckon? So is that all right, Lachlan? Yeah. But really ask God for wisdom, because no, I will not take on counselling as such, but I do give counsel. That makes sense?
All right, I think we just had still. Pardon? No, we'll make this perhaps our last one, just because of the time.
Actually, Di had mentioned that some people are unteachable and so you can't mentor them. So what I was just wanting to know is, does that mean we should still be seeking to disciple everyone, even if they're not teachable? Should we be seeking to do that with every new convert?
Do you want me to do that one? I think in the discipling process, it sorts itself out. We find when we start with groups of people who have come for discipling, within the first 6 to 8 weeks, those that really are hungry to grow will keep on going, and those for various reasons who are not ready for it, or are not hungry for it, or don't have a teachable spirit, they tend to drop out. Discipling, often you don't have much choice, although you could handpick those you disciple, but often we just, for example, in this church, we just announce that we're starting discipleship training, and anybody interested come along, and we explain what it's all about. We show them the cycle. We say there are 3 commitments now if you really want to grow through what we're offering. There are 3 growth goals. We have a little covenant that we get them to sign, growth goals. First is to come regularly to the discipleship group meetings every week. Make it a number one priority. Don't just kind of come when you feel like it and stay away when you don't want to come. You really need to be there because you're on a journey together, and if you miss weeks, you're going to miss crucial areas. The second thing we say is each week prepare your study in advance. So you work at home, come along prepared. You don't come cold to the meeting. You come out of self-feeding through the week on those areas that the manual is taking you through. So you come prepared with your heart warmed a little bit towards it. And the third thing, commit yourself to memorize at least one verse a week, which is built into the training. And so right up front we say, this is the deal. You want to grow in your Christian life? These are the 3 minimum requirements to help you achieve that goal. Now, if you don't want to do that, if you can't come every week, or you don't want to commit to weekly meeting, and you don't want to do preparation, and you don't want to learn a memory verse, well, you can still come, but you're only going to get a fraction of the benefit of this. The more you put into it, the more you're going to get out of it. And so we let that sorting out process take place. And over the first term, usually, that sorting goes, and we expect some may not continue, and that's okay. We'll encourage them and try to keep them going as long as we can, but if they really are not ready for it, not prepared to go with us, then we don't persist. But then second and third term, the stayers are the ones who are going to be the growers. All right? So you've got to be ready for that. There are disappointments in discipling. People that you really wanted to see go on for one reason or another don't always go with you the full distance. When it comes to mentoring, normally mentoring, you choose the person. And there has to be a kind of compatibility and a rapport right from the start, and a teachable spirit, and all those kind of things are there from the beginning. Or you suss that out at the beginning and you decide whether you're going to go with this or not. All right? Well, I know there might be other questions, but let me just wrap up everything now, very quickly tonight. And just a few quick final things. Where do we go from here? How can you let your life impact others? I guess there are different outcomes from this series of 6 sessions together on disciple making and mentoring. The first outcome might be this. Some of you might really be thinking in your life, hey, I really am at a very basic level in my Christian journey, and I really need to grow myself. I've got so many areas undeveloped in my spiritual journey, my life. I need to go through a discipleship training myself with someone else discipling me or mentoring me. Some of you might be in that situation now. You really need to be discipled. So that's one possibility. Second possibility is that you feel that as far as you have gone in your Christian life, you could pass on something to at least one other person. And so one-to-one mentoring is an option. Where you find another younger Christian, someone that you have a rapport with, someone that is some friendship there already, or someone that you can look out for and come alongside a newer Christian. And you can say, hey, why don't we would you like to work through a little discipleship training process with me? And we'll go through, say, my first steps and explain what the book is, and just do it with them, week by week. And you do the studies too. You learn the memory verses too. You grow as you do it. You will be amazed how taking someone else on spurs you on to grow, because you have to be authentic in this. You can't lead someone further than you have gone yourself. And so one-to-one might be something that some of you here could consider as the next step. For others of you who perhaps have had more background and experience in the Christian journey and have even been involved in leading groups, you may be able to come in as a small group leader to disciple a small group of people. That might be something structured within the life of the church, as we have from time to time, or it could be something that you set up yourself. You don't have to wait for someone to set it up for you. Get 2 or 3 younger believers and say, hey, let's do this together. Just like Harry, when I was a teenager, did it for me with two of my mates. 3 of us together for a year were discipled by Harry. It wasn't in the church, it was in his home, it was just, he did it. Maybe some of you can be thinking in that direction. Or some of you, again, more mature, perhaps in your Christian walk, who might have been involved in discipling already, feel that perhaps you could come along and help mentor somebody. Just be a support for someone who's already heading towards God's plan for their life. They're on the journey, they're hungry to know more, and you feel a compatibility with them and an interest in them and want to be an encourager for them. And basically, mentoring is encouragement. Being there as a sounding board, being there as a support, encouraging them on toward God's goal. Let me just finish with a simple illustration. The great call is to make disciples. Jesus calls us to become his true disciples, first of all, and then to make disciples. And the picture that comes to my mind is a relay race. As you know, the runners in a relay race, the first runner takes the baton and starts the lap, has to get up to speed himself in that lap. And when he's got full speed up and he's completed his circuit or her circuit, I'm just using him as an example, ladies. When he's finished his circuit, he now comes back to the start, and there's another runner standing still, waiting, and gradually that runner starts to pick up speed, and for a while they run together until that second runner now gets up to the speed of the first runner, and then the baton's passed over and the runner says, you go for it now, you run your lap as fast as you can. And that runner drops back now, has finished that transfer process, and now the next runner does the same thing. And so we have this cyclical concept. As you get up to speed in your Christian life, as God starts to work in your life, don't keep it to yourself. Pass the baton. And then when you've got someone else up to speed and pass the baton, you encourage them to do the same thing. And you go back and don't just now relax, but you find another new runner to start on their lap. And you be a starter of other runners as you're running your lap, because we keep running in the sense. You keep starting others on the journey. How well are you running your lap? And when are you going to pass on your baton to another? That's the challenge that I want to finish with tonight. The challenge for each of you. Are you running the race well? God wants you to run well the race. He's calling you to draw near to him, to walk with him, and to be a true disciple. And then out of that relationship, what he does in your life, he wants you to be an impactor of others. And the Christ life in you will influence others to become runners in the race as well. And so I pray that out of what we've done over these weeks together, that will become important in your life, and you will be part of what God is wanting to do in you and through you. May God bless you each one. What we do as our final part now is just to allow time for those of you who have not yet shared in your small groups the study in My First Steps to do so. But we also have a course response form that we want to give to you and give you, before you do your little group activities, opportunity just to fill this little response out as to what the course has meant for you.